2020 was far and away the most interesting year of my life. The world shut down, everyone was stuck inside, TikTok became famous, and everyone was furious with each other. And no, it wasn't because of mask mandates or an election or a virus taking the lives of millions of people. No, everyone was mad over something much more serious. Video games. Who won Game of the Year? I'd hear people say The Last of Us Part 2 deserved that win, and I'd agree. Then I'd hear people say Final Fantasy VII should have won, and I'd say, okay. Then some goober would come out of the woodwork and say Ghost of Tsushima should have won. This is a game I've thought about covering on the channel for a while now, but to be honest, I never really thought it was worth it. I just couldn't get myself excited enough to sit down and replay it. But with the release of Ghost of Yotek and the leash of the YouTube algorithm tied tightly around my neck, I figure now is as good a time as any to look back and review Ghost of Tsushima, spoilers and all. The very first thing I noticed about this game on replay was that while it didn't take home Game of the Year, and I'm not exactly sure it deserved to, Ghost of Tsushima absolutely deserved the award it did take home. Best Art Direction. And that shouldn't be a surprise knowing their history with games like Infamous and the animations they use to tell stories, which are actually here in Ghost, translated into a traditional sumie style. And that's just one of the many impressive ways they use the setting of Japan to the fullest. Like how the soundtrack is based on 13th century Japanese music like the kind they use in imperial courts. They used an instrument played mostly by blind monks that so few people know how to play that it's considered an abandoned instrument. And they pay homage to more modern Japanese culture as well, not only with the whole presentation style dedicated to Akira Kurosawa, but with very cinematic framing of duels and cutscenes, and standoffs that look like they're ripped directly from Seven Samurai. But they find creative ways to let the player influence the art direction as well, letting it guide the player as diegetic wind for the waypoint system instead of a minimap, adding a dynamic photo mode that allows for what feels like limitless creative freedom, and letting the player express themselves with haikus.
Calm waters, calm mind. Growth that shelters all it sees. Sturdy do we stand.
Wow. That doesn't mean anything. I appreciate what they were trying to go for here, and sometimes you can make something meaningful, but in trying to create a wide range of emotion and symbolism with so few options, a lot of the haikus the players can compose feel disjointed, like none of the lines were meant for each other. But one of the most unique parts of Ghost of Tsushima is its beautiful open world filled with colorful environments, intricate architecture, and landmarks that feel like they were the subject of a painting, like the rest of the world you see from this landmark was created around it, on its terms to complement it. It just comes with one tiny little caveat, a little asterisk in the fine print, and it's that you cannot be moving at all, even a little bit, if you want to see these sites because you cannot turn the motion blur off. Listen, dude, I've never really been a big technical guy for games. It really depends on the game, whether I choose quality or performance mode. But one thing that I am and will always be consistent on is taking that motion blur slider and taking it all the way down. But because that wasn't even an option in Ghost of Tsushima, this game was genuinely nauseating the player for the first half hour or so as I adjusted to it. It's weird, a game that allows this much player customization has barely any customization for how the game runs. Other than that though, the technical side of this game is absolute magic. Literally. This is real life magic. Not as if it's so good it cannot be real, but Ghost of Tsushima is all about misdirection. Zooming out and showing you the flowing leaves and landscapes to distract you from how bad the lip syncing is, and even if that doesn't work and you're still watching the characters, they're too small on the screen for you to notice. I mean, that is a whole lot better than some other games I've seen that just say whatever. I mean, at least they tried, but that's still not great. They want you to focus on how cool the assassination animations are to distract you from how often they don't line up. Or the fact that the enemies stop what they're doing completely and stand straight up so you can kill them. They add little details like Jin reaching out to touch the flowers he's riding through, so you think they put that level of detail into everything. And so you're not thinking about the graphical pop-in, the weird cloth simulation, the bad foot tracking on the character models, or how they didn't render the high-res ground here and just zoomed in on the low-res model. The mission called the Ghost of Yarikawa ends with the exciting sequence where you unlock the ghost dance, so you remember that, and not the fact that you destroy the Mongol catapults by walking up to them, holding R2 and watching the screen fade to black, and then seeing the catapult still be completely intact when it fades back in. But they can only keep that facade up and distract you for so long before leaks start springing up faster than they can patch them. Like when the NPCs collide in their pathing, or when the monkey's paw grants their wish to be immune to fire, but it comes at the cost of them being able to walk in a straight line. The bad pathing isn't just for random NPCs either. The enemies can be really annoying to get around in stealth, which is also affected by just bad level design. It always feels random, like they threw enemies in some tall grass in an arena with no clear pattern or route, and arbitrarily decided whether it would be a stealth encounter or not, culminating in the the perfect storm of cow feces where you have to poison the Mongols in the worst mission of the game. It stands out as such a stain on this game because of how stark of a contrast it is to how dynamic and exciting the rest of the missions are, like all the trailing missions. Okay, that's a bad example. This mission right here, where you're sneaking into a Mongol base to save Yuna's brother from being executed, and you have to sneak around on rooftops and follow Yuna by trailing behind her. Huh. Ghost of Tsushima has so much downtime that it makes my brain itch. Yeah, the open world and gameplay are great, but it's when they meet that they just do not feel compatible. The climbing has the mindlessness that people think the Uncharted climbing has. Despite how lame the stealth is, it has the most basic distraction and kill mechanics. And the loop of exploring and finding enemy bases to clear out and unlock more of the map made me realize, this is an Ubisoft game. Why on earth would I, Carter, gave Far Cry 3 a 2.5 out of 10 mixed wagons, play an Ubisoft game? Because honestly, this is the best version of that. This is the game Ubisoft could make if they put as much effort into Far Cry or Assassin's Creed as they do Rayman. And the reason I was willing to forgive or at least move past those lows is because of those highs, the biggest of those being the combat. I will say that it feels like you're playing as that old lady, where you're too floaty, like your feet aren't connecting with the ground and you're just gliding over it. But that's rarely an issue with how slow and methodically you can move in sword combat. The enemies do that thing the Arkham games do where goons take turns attacking instead of just jumping you, but in a way that feels very unique, where you're surrounded, have next to no movement options, and sometimes can only land one attack between blocks and parries. I do think it would hurt in these situations, but having the option to lock onto enemies would be nice, especially in duels, because that is the only problem with duels. Sucker Punch knew how cool they are, with Jin just flicking his thumb to stick his sword out of its sheath, and with a different, closer camera position to show how intimate these fights are, coming down to just 2 people with none of the explosives or black powder bombs or flaming arrows raining on you. The duels are so good that literally anything after them is a letdown, which isn't a problem most of the time because they're usually the last part of a mission, but going from a one-on-one duel with the main villain of the game to him being just another enemy in the crowd is so deflating. The frictionless gameplay of how all you need to do to equip your bow is aim and holding off on dismemberment to emphasize the ghost stance tie a nice bow on the gameplay, adding the last few features of the combat needed to be almost completely well-rounded. Now, I know since this is a review, a video based on my subjective opinion, some of you are gonna disagree with me on that, and that's fine. The last person I expected to disagree with me on the gameplay of Ghost of Tsushima, though, is Ghost of Tsushima itself. The ghost stance and archery are the exact type of combat systems that the game simultaneously rewards and reprimands you for. The game tries to hold you accountable for the way you play the game, which is fine, but the most they ever do is play a cutscene of your uncle calling you bitch made. And it does make sense. The whole story is based on what moral principles you're willing to sacrifice to save your people, where the line is drawn. And they beat it into you to stand your ground, make no compromises, but at times you just do not have a choice. You side with Yuna out of desperation because you just cannot compete with the Mongols in the in-game combat itself. You're much better off stealth killing them first and thinning their numbers to even the odds despite how unfair and dishonorable it is. It uses the gameplay to communicate how often the wrong thing to do is the easiest thing to do. But the thing is, because of how lame the stealth is and how fun the combat is, your sense of honor strengthens as Jin's weakens. He resorts to more and more desperate actions in the story as you clear bases head on the honorable way because it's more fun. In one way, that conflicts with the story if you're trying to be immersed as Jin. But in another way, it works because I sided with Shimura more and more as my gameplay did. Jin's story is not a good one. It's a tragedy about a samurai whose life was set up only for success, and how his emotions and sense of duty brought about his fall from grace. Nothing turns out well for him. His clan is disbanded, he's pursued and disowned by his father figure, he loses his home, and will be hunted by the shogun until he dies, because while he's a good person, it's not by his actions. He commits evil acts with the mentality that the ends justify the means, which is a very dangerous and slippery slope. But the problem is, we didn't have a choice. And no, I don't care that we didn't get a choice to poison the Mongols. I'm perfectly fine if the main character does things I don't agree with, but you have to accept that we're gonna judge them for it. It felt like they were going for Ellie's story in The Last of Us Part 2, but unlike Ellie, Sucker Punch really did not want us to dislike Jin, so up until the very end of the game, his actions only ever hurt the Mongols, and they have Yuna backing him up and supporting every single one of his decisions no matter how depraved. And I'm very disappointed that Sucker Punch only emphasized that at the very end, because we could have had a much more interesting arc for him. He reminds me of Anakin Skywalker, where he's this kid who lost everything, and because of his emotionally charged sense of righteousness, he goes against the code of the order he belongs to and just ruins himself, which ends up in him fighting and severing the connection to the only father figure he's had for most of his life. Jin's cause is a very noble one, but like I said, he has a mentality that the ends justify the means, which the game shows us is incredibly dangerous. Because of his drastic actions, the Mongols learn a new way to murder the people of Tsushima using his poison. And when Jin finally finds out about this, the consequences his actions have on his people, he poses an interesting question. Damn. What's that gotta do with me, though? Jin and Shimura are two headstrong, unwavering characters, an unstoppable force and an immovable object.
You have no honor, and you are a slave to it.
They both want to be family, but because of who they are, they just can't. And that only becomes a reality in these dire circumstances. Their story is so potent and impactful that you forget how fast the relationship crashes. The day Shimura tells Jin he'll officially take him in as his own son, and the last day that they'll ever see each other are much closer than you think. So what the hell was all this for? What was the point of that long-ass war against Attila the Hun? That's real, by the way. I mean, obviously it's to be the thing that splits Jin and Shimura on their principles, but did we really need it to go on for so long? So much of the first 2 acts feel like empty calories. The lorem ipsum of video game missions. Yeah, the sake guy was useful for freeing Taka, but what help could he have possibly been when they retake Castle Kaneda? Yes, Shimura did tell Jin that certain actions would make them as bad as the Mongols. But if we saw so many cutscenes of the Khan mocking Shimura with Jin's own actions, why didn't we ever get a moment where Shimura looks his nephew in the eye and says, Khotan Khan was right about you? And Ryuzo, oh Ryuzo, why do you even exist? Why do we spend so much time fighting you and so little time talking or fighting with you? First off, the chip on his shoulder is not subtle. They beat you over the head with the fact he has something to prove until a cartoon lump starts growing. Second, while his twist does make sense, it should have been built up way more because by the time he betrays you, I don't know him enough to care nearly as much as Jin does, which makes him so unimpactful that killing him was rooted more in obligation than vengeance. And after I did kill him, at the end of the game, I couldn't even remember if Jin actually saw that through or not.
Ryuzo said you'd get rid of me as soon as you had a son of your own.
Man, why were you even friends in the first place? I mean, I guess it is in character when you see who else Jin is friends with.
We have to go in quietly.
Like thieves.
What's wrong with that?
What's wrong with being a thief, huh? Yeah, good question. Dude, and that's the cinematic moments, the ones important enough to get full cutscenes. Nobody feels human moment to moment. Look at how Jin sees this woman who raised him weeping and just sits there for like 10 seconds before he even says anything. And when I have the choice on how Jin's gonna act, when I get to pick what he says, the options aren't great either. Yeah, I think approaching would be more honorable than deceiving them to lure them in.
I'll kick dirt in his eyes, then break his nose.
That is not remotely what I wanted to say. I want to make it clear, the actors in this game are really, really talented. I'm not discrediting them or their work or saying they did a bad job. Their performances are great. I'm just saying the writing is really rough. I feel like there's a lot of lost potential with the character dynamics too. Like, they decided to make Shimura Jin's uncle on his mom's side, but if he was his dad's brother, they could have raised the conflict a bit. While Jin lost his father, Shimura could have lost his brother and had this underlying resentment he's battling because he knows it wasn't Jin's fault, but he still can't help but think about how Jin could have saved him. I also went into this game thinking the ghost would be more of a myth, like because he survived the attack on the beach and getting tossed off a bridge, fraud watch, he'd be known as some vengeful spirit who refuses to leave the physical world, but instead, Sucker Punch just full tilt made him Japanese Batman, especially in the DLC, Iki Island. I mean, come on, he gets hit with hallucinogenics that make you go crazy and just doesn't with the power of being the main character? Yeah, I haven't seen that before. The combat in the DLC isn't the greatest either. It had a real rough start with the shamans who do this Mongolian chant that buffs every other enemy in the area and makes them just berate you with attacks. I seriously cannot think of any game that did that type of enemy and made it work and not just be a thorn in your side. And you know how after his fight, they just turned Khotan Khan into a regular enemy? Yeah, well, they did that again with absolutely no discretion. There are now just regular enemies with that moveset. It's not just him anymore. I do think they upgraded the boss fights a bit, though. They made some regular enemies switch weapons, and they integrated that into the Eagle's right-hand man, who has pretty much every single type of weapon, but they break as you stagger him. So if you break his stagger with his shield and staff, he's just left with 2 swords, and then if you break it again, he's left with just 1 for the rest of the fight. But the Eagle's fight is easily the best in the whole game because of how lame the others have been. They're fine. I like the duels a lot, but they're undercut a bit by how easy they are on normal difficulty, but the Eagle just drains your health bar and moves so quickly. She wasn't as hard as a character like Gina from God of War Ragnarok or some of the Souls bosses, but I think she was way harder than a boss like Gascoigne from Bloodborne. While I'm not really a fan of the Souls games, mainly because of those runbacks, the Eagle does give you that dopamine hit from parrying hits that need fast reflexes and can just wipe you out. A very interesting part of the gameplay in the DLC specifically though, is how they decided to integrate important story beats and character moments into the open world. Like, take a look at this.
So weak and frail. Your weapons.
Useless. You're not strong enough.
Dude, none of these feel impactful, especially when Jin just lies on the ground staring up at the sky at the end. And they had a golden opportunity to give the player choices with more impact than what color you can make your armor. The Eagle tells you that with her hallucinogens, you can unlock supernatural abilities if you join her, and I would have liked to be able to choose that. Most people playing this DLC, at least on release, would have beaten the main story first and at most would have just had a cleanup like a few side quests and villages to free. There would have been no narrative impact to Jin joining the Eagle, or at least using your methods to further his goals. I've already seen him do worse. And speaking of that, we gotta talk about Iki Island's moral tenets, because they really conflict with the main story. The most emotionally impactful image in the story, to me at least, is seeing the strong and stoic Lord Shimura weeping. And it's all caused by Jin's actions, which led them to duel and disgracing the name of Clan Sakai until it was disbanded. Jin Sakai is a stain on his family and the man who died saving him. So why on earth is Jin's father such an ass? This guy was the Vaughn of Tsushima, okay? Some people need to be gone, bro. He was a problem. Legitimately torturing and starving people to death. And if that guy is Jin's father, I do not care that Clan Sakai was disbanded. The quote-unquote honor of Jin's family was already blood-soaked. I like the idea of hating Tenzo for killing your father and wanting revenge. I like moving past it because of how awful he was and using the way he was killed to your advantage, but you cannot have both at the same time. They're mutually exclusive. You cannot want revenge if he's murdering people and you saw it yourself growing up. You cannot move past it this easily if he was a righteous man. There is a third option though. Making Jin understand now why his father did those things. Make the people of Iki Island's punishment fit the crime and have him do what's horrible but necessary. Adapt his father's story to have him carve the path that Jin's walking on. And despite how close they got to that, they still try to have their cake and eat it too.
Kill him, you coward! No. I will never be like you.
Iki Island is so frustrating because the gameplay, boss fights, and story, what little we get of them, are all, I think, better than the main content, the story especially. Jin's relationship with his dad is so well done in this specific DLC on its own, but the only way you can play it is by owning the game with conflicting ideologies. I have played a lot of okay games, and this is one of them. Like I said, it feels like it's Ubisoft, but the best version of what Ubisoft could do if they really tried and decided to actually make good games. So Ghost of Tsushima is a great version of an okay game, if that makes any sense. And I think the biggest sign of that for me was how few notes I took during this game, which means not much was remarkably good enough for me to write down, but not much was remarkably bad enough for me to write down. I relate to this game a lot because, like me, it's bloated. It did not need to be as long as it was, and I think because of that, big moments like Taka's beheading or the ghost stance dismemberment got drowned out a bit and left me feeling like they could have used that M rating more. So with that, Ghost of Tsushima gets a 6.5 out of 10 for me. I just don't think this style of game where the combat is amazing, but the gameplay is so focused on the open world works for me anymore. Like, it's so overdone that it has to be really special for me to be into it. But it does feel unique, and like, Ghost really kind of owns the traditional feudal Japan setting right now in that open world action Ubisoft genre. And I'm excited to see them improve in the next game, and I think it would be really silly for any game in that genre to come in on their territory and give a direct comparison to show how much better Ghost is. Oh, and they're just gonna do it anyway.